We all love a good zombie apocalypse. The visceral thrill of watching a ragtag band of survivors sprint through the Georgia woods, dispatching the undead with machetes and crossbows, taps into our primal survival instincts. But from a strictly thermodynamic perspective, that entire scenario is a fairy tale. When you strip away the plot armor and apply real-world caloric expenditure data, a glaring, inescapable truth emerges. Running through the woods every day, fighting, carrying heavy gear, and relying on scavenged canned goods is mathematically impossible. Without immediate large-scale agriculture, every single character in that situation would have starved to death long before the end of the second year. Survival is not an action movie. It is an unforgiving biological ledger. Survival is not about landing perfect headshots. It is a strict accounting game of calories in versus calories out. When you do the brutal math, a grid-down apocalypse looks less like a thriller and more like a grim, rapid descent into starvation. The human body operates on a basal metabolic rate, the minimum number of calories required just to keep your heart beating and lungs functioning while at complete rest. For an average adult male, that baseline is about 1,800 calories a day. For an average female, it is around 1,400. But that is just to stay alive in a coma. To determine your actual caloric needs downrange, we must calculate your total daily energy expenditure based on absolute worst-case scenario stresses. This is where the reality check hits hardest. You do not calculate these numbers for your own ego or self-preservation. You calculate them so your child does not look up at you with sunken, hollow cheeks, begging for a meal you simply do not have. Guilt is the heaviest weight you will carry in a survival scenario. Failing to prepare means watching the people you are supposed to protect waste away right in front of you. When you are forced to make the agonizing choice between who gets the last handful of scavenged calories and who goes hungry to bed, you will finally realize that preparation was never a hobby. It was a duty to your family. Let us establish the baseline mathematics of human metabolism during the initial outbreak. In a total collapse, you are engaged in what the military classifies as heavy to exhaustive physical work. You are walking miles every single day, sprinting in bursts of sheer panic, chopping wood and carrying packs loaded with weapons, ammunition, and scavenged gear. According to data from the Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, an infantryman carrying a standard 50-pound load expends between 3,500 and 5,000 calories per day. During periods of acute stress and heavy combat with the infected, that number spikes to over 6,000 calories a day. Your engine is redlining. We will be conservative with our math. Let us assume the average adult in a nomadic survival group requires 3,500 calories a day just to maintain their body weight and perform the intense physical tasks required to stay alive. If we take a modest group of 15 survivors, the daily caloric requirement for that specific group is 52,500 calories. In a single week, that small group requires over 367,000 calories. In a month, they need more than 1.5 million calories to avoid biological degradation. Where are these massive calories coming from? This is where the thermodynamic ledger begins to hemorrhage. The prevailing Hollywood trope is that survivors can simply wander into abandoned homes, gas stations, and grocery stores to find infinite sustenance. This completely ignores the reality of modern supply chains and the true nutritional density of scavenged food. According to Federal Emergency Management data, the average modern grocery store only holds about 3 days' worth of food for its surrounding population. In a panic scenario, the shelves are stripped bare by desperate locals within 48 hours. By the time your group is moving through the ruined suburbs on foot, carefully checking corners for threats, the easy calories are already gone. You are hunting for ghosts. But let us assume your group gets lucky and finds an untouched residential pantry. What are you actually pulling out of those cabinets? A standard can of green beans contains roughly 105 calories. A standard can of condensed chicken noodle soup contains roughly 250 calories. A standard can of baked beans contains roughly 400 calories. To meet the 3,500 calorie daily requirement, a single survivor would need to eat 33 cans of green beans or 14 cans of chicken soup every single day. The volume of processed food required to sustain heavy combat operations is physically staggering. For a group of 15 people relying exclusively on canned soup, they must locate, secure, and physically transport 210 cans of soup every single day. Herein lies the physical impossibility. The sheer weight. A standard can of soup weighs about 1 pound. To carry 3 days' worth of food for one person means adding 42 pounds of dead weight to their tactical pack. As established by military physiology, increasing the load carried directly increases your baseline caloric expenditure. The heavier the pack on your back, the more calories you burn with every single step you take down that ruined highway. The more calories you burn dragging that gear, the more food you inherently require. The more food you require, the heavier the pack becomes. This is a thermodynamic death spiral. The massive energy expended moving from house to house, breaking down reinforced doors, neutralizing violent threats, and carrying heavy canned goods quickly eclipses the actual caloric value of the food you manage to scavenge. By the end of the first month, the easily accessible processed food within a walkable radius of your camp would be entirely depleted. You are burning a $100 bill just to earn a single dime in return. The psychological stress response aggressively accelerates this starvation process. Elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels dramatically increase your resting metabolic rate. When terrified, the human body actively begins breaking down its own muscle tissue to flood the bloodstream with glucose for rapid fight-or-flight responses. You are literally eating your own biceps and thigh muscles to fund your daily panic attacks. When you do not consume enough heavy carbohydrates to replenish those depleted glycogen stores, the physical deterioration is rapid and brutal. You are eroding your own structural integrity just to maintain a baseline level of awareness in a hostile zone. Hope is not a strategy. Most people guess they have enough food stockpiled, but the math says otherwise. Go to protocolsurvival.com, calculate your exact survival score, and enroll in our free Catastrophe Survival 101 course right now. Get the training before you actually need it, because when the grocery stores go permanently dark, your good intentions will not put calories in your family's stomachs. You need a solid, impenetrable mathematical foundation for your food storage logistics, and you need to build that foundation today. Moving into the lockdown phase of survival, the daily grind firmly sets in. True survival is not a marathon, it is a grueling series of traumatic, high-intensity intervals. Engaging in desperate hand-to-hand combat or fleeing from immediate, overwhelming danger requires immense anaerobic energy reserves. Swinging a 3-pound machete with enough force to penetrate a skull burns calories at a rate similar to competitive wrestling, roughly 400 to 600 calories an hour, concentrated in extremely violent bursts. Every time you swing a weapon or sprint for your life, you are draining a biological battery that cannot be easily recharged. Within mere weeks of a grid-down viral outbreak, characters who are underfed and continuously overworked would experience a precipitous drop in lean muscle mass. You would not look like a highly trained muscular action hero roaming the wasteland. You would rapidly exhibit the classic, ugly signs of profound starvation. Sunken eyes, hollowed cheeks, severe lethargy, muscle wasting, and sharp cognitive decline. The Hollywood idea that you could continuously sprint through the dense woods and cleanly neutralize threats while running a 2,000 calorie per day deficit is pure biological fiction. Your body simply turns off the power to non-essential systems. Basic hygiene and sanitation become massive caloric drains that absolutely nobody accounts for in their bug-out plans. Boiling unsafe water requires massive amounts of fuel. Gathering that fuel requires chopping wood. Chopping hardwood burns hundreds of calories an hour and dulls your tools. Digging deep latrines far enough away from your base camp to prevent bacterial disease requires intense, back-breaking manual labor. Every single necessary action to maintain camp hygiene aggressively taxes your daily energy budget. If you neglect these critical tasks to save a few calories, you invite microscopic pathogens into your group, effectively signing your own death warrant. Let us talk strictly about water weight. The human body requires roughly 3 to 4 liters of clean water a day under heavy exertion and high stress. Water weighs 8.3 pounds per liquid gallon. Carrying a basic 3-day supply of water adds nearly 25 pounds to a survivor's tactical pack. You are not just carrying defensive weapons and scavenged canned food, you are acting as a human pack mule for your own basic hydration, exponentially increasing the kinetic energy you burn just to walk down a ruined, sun-baked highway. You sweat out the water you carry to carry the water. Drinking carelessly from wild streams exposes you to devastating parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium. A single agonizing bout of dysentery will rapidly dehydrate you and completely strip your gut of the mechanical ability to absorb new calories. This accelerates the starvation process exponentially. In a collapsed world without pharmaceutical antibiotics or sterilized intravenous fluids, severe uncontrolled diarrhea is an absolute death sentence. You will not die in a glorious blaze of tactical gunfire defending the gates. You will die quietly in the filthy woods because you drank bad water just to save the physical energy it would have taken to build a fire and boil it. The psychological toll of maintaining constant silence adds an entirely new layer of deep fatigue. In a highly hostile environment populated by reactive threats, arbitrary noise is a fatal liability. Walking carefully through the dead woods, actively avoiding dry leaves, communicating strictly with hand signals, and aggressively suppressing coughs requires sustained, exhausting mental focus. This hyperneurological vigilance aggressively drains glucose directly from the brain. Your executive cognitive function declines. You start making bad decisions. You miss obvious tripwires. You fail to spot the imminent threat in the tree line until it is already right on top of you. As the lockdown phase violently drags on, the micronutrient catastrophe truly begins. Modern humans are entirely accustomed to commercial diets fortified with synthetic vitamins and minerals. Take away the modern grocery store infrastructure, and historical diseases of malnutrition return with an absolute vengeance. Vitamin C cannot be synthesized internally by the human body. It must be actively consumed. It degrades rapidly in canned and processed survival foods over time. Without fresh fruits, raw vegetables, or foraged pine needle tea, your tactical group would inevitably develop clinical scurvy within 1 to 3 months of the initial power grid failure. Scurvy is not a funny pirate joke from history class. It is a terrifying systemic breakdown of your body's connective tissues. Symptoms include profusely bleeding gums, the spontaneous reopening of old healed wounds, and severe paralyzing joint pain. A survivor suffering from advanced scurvy cannot sprint away from a horde of threats. They can barely stand up without screaming. If your master plan is to live indefinitely off scavenged ramen noodles and expired canned soup, you are setting a biological timer on your own structural integrity. When the collagen in your body literally stops regenerating, your survival run is permanently over. Then there is the creeping horror of pellagra. If your desperate group somehow managed to forage a massive amount of wild corn, but did not know the indigenous chemical process of nixtamalization, treating the corn with an alkaline solution like wood ash to release the bound niacin, you would rapidly develop severe vitamin B3 deficiency. Clinical pellagra is characterized by the fatal 4 Ds: diarrhea, dermatitis, dementia, and death. Your stubborn reliance on a single, improperly processed, scavenged carbohydrate source can literally drive you violently insane before it finally kills you in the dirt. Nutrition is far more complex than just filling a stomach. Chronic sleep deprivation further destroys your metabolic efficiency. When you are running a strict rotating security watch to prevent night attacks, you are never getting 8 hours of unbroken sleep. Your group is sleeping in tense shifts, constantly waking up to unfamiliar snaps and groans in the dark woods. This chronic sleep deprivation severely impairs glucose tolerance and dramatically spikes ghrelin, the body's primary hunger hormone. Your exhausted brain screams for high-calorie food that simply does not exist, while simultaneously becoming vastly less efficient at processing whatever meagre, low-quality calories you actually manage to find during the day. Cold weather is the absolute ultimate grim reaper of your daily caloric budgets. When environmental temperatures drop, your basal metabolic rate automatically increases as it aggressively burns stored calories simply to generate life-saving internal heat. This autonomic process is called thermogenesis. If you required 3,500 calories in the hot summer, you might require an agonizing 4,500 calories in the freezing rain of a grid-down winter without modern heating systems. Violent shivering alone can burn hundreds of calories an hour. You are rapidly burning through your body's critical internal fuel reserves just to keep your core temperature stable enough to survive. Every protective layer of winter clothing you add directly increases the physical friction and weight of your movement. Heavy insulated winter boots, wet wool jackets, and permanently saturated gear turn a simple perimeter patrol into an exhausting, punishing slog. Your tactical mobility severely drops, your energy expenditure absolutely skyrockets, and the harsh environment completely strips away your ability to recover. You will lie awake in a freezing, damp sleeping bag, physically feeling your own body cannibalize its muscle tissue to keep your vital organs warm until the morning light finally breaks. Winter does not care about your tactical gear. The romanticized myth of the lone wolf survivor dies right here in the cold. A single person cannot effectively maintain firewatch, safely forage for food, boil unpurified water, and secure a tactical perimeter simultaneously without collapsing from sheer exhaustion within 2 weeks. You absolutely need a group to divide the labor. But a group means a massive, terrifying multiplier on the daily caloric requirement. 15 people is 52,000 calories a day. The larger the survival group, the larger your ecological footprint, and the faster you strip the surrounding woodland environment of every single edible resource. It is a vicious numbers game. This is the true, inescapable grind. The quiet, deeply unglamorous reality of the lockdown phase. It is not a cinematic series of heroic gunfights. It is a slow, agonizing math problem where the biological numbers are always heavily stacked against you. You are slowly bleeding precious calories, vital vitamins, and core body heat. The scavenged neighborhood cans are permanently gone. The carried water is incredibly heavy. The freezing cold is creeping in through your boots. And the terrifying realization finally hits the exhausted group that moving blindly from empty house to empty house is nothing more than a highly mobile, nomadic funeral procession. You cannot simply cheat the strict biological ledger. You can possess the best tactical gear, the highest tier thermal optics, and endless heavy crates of stored ammunition. But if you do not have the sustained caloric density to actually fuel the fragile human machine operating that advanced gear, you are essentially just a very well-armed loot drop for whoever eventually finds your starved, frozen body. The brutal transition from neighborhood scavenging to actual land-based sustainability is the absolute deadliest filter in any long-term survival timeline. If you cannot produce food, you are just waiting your turn to expire. You might firmly believe that the National Guard would eventually step in, that a heavily armed, mechanized infantry unit would lock down the perimeter, establish a massive supply depot, and hand out government MREs to the remaining survivors. But in a total grid down, viral contagion, or catastrophic regional collapse, the military infrastructure fragments. Heavy logistics chains permanently break. Deployed units go AWOL to protect their own vulnerable families back home. There is absolutely no mechanized cavalry coming to save you. The supply trucks are not rolling down the highway. You are entirely on your own, and the foraging fallacy is about to hit you incredibly hard. When the grid goes permanently dark, the cloud goes right down with it. You desperately need a command center that works completely offline. I built Protocol Survival to be that exact system. Secure your inventory, calculate your true caloric needs, and access your free training modules right now while you still have a cellular signal. Go to protocolsurvival.com. Do the hard math today, so your family does not have to pay the ultimate price tomorrow. Do not wait for the internet to drop to realize you are unprepared. As urban scavenging becomes completely untenable, desperate survivors turn toward living off the land. From a hard preparedness perspective, relying entirely on wild game and foraging for a group of 15 people in a static location is a guaranteed recipe for slow starvation. In survival energetics, we constantly use the rigid concept of energy return on investment. If it strictly costs you 500 calories to track, kill, field dress, and thoroughly cook a wild squirrel, and that squirrel only yields 400 calories, your biological investment is entirely negative. You are literally working yourself to death out there in the woods. Let us deeply analyze the brutal math of small wild game. An eastern grey squirrel yields about 1 pound of usable edible meat, providing roughly 600 extremely lean calories. To meet the baseline daily thermodynamic requirement for a stressed group of 15 people, your designated hunter would need to successfully track, kill, and fully process 87 individual squirrels every single day. That is statistically, logistically, and physically impossible. The surrounding woods would be violently stripped of all small game within a 5-mile radius in less than a single week. The ecosystem simply cannot support that level of sudden human predation. What about tracking much larger game? An average mature white-tailed deer yields about 50 pounds of highly edible meat. Venison is notoriously lean, providing roughly 700 calories per processed pound. A single harvested deer yields roughly 35,000 total calories. This grimly means your hungry group needs to kill a massive, mature deer every single day and a half just to break even on their baseline caloric burn. And that absolutely assumes zero meat spoilage, perfect primitive preservation techniques, and the complete absence of scavenging predators aggressively moving in to steal your hard-earned kills in the middle of the night. Wildlife conservation data from the Fish and Wildlife Service clearly shows that wild game populations are highly finite and incredibly easily disrupted. If the local human population suddenly reverted to aggressive subsistence hunting, local game populations within a 20-mile radius would be completely decimated within a few short months. Furthermore, firing loud, unsuppressed weapons or walking clumsily through the dry woods will drive all remaining game aggressively out of the area immediately. You simply cannot hunt effectively while constantly looking over your shoulder for hostile, unpredictable threats moving through the same exact terrain. The noise discipline alone destroys your hunting yield. Even if your designated hunter could somehow provide infinite small game, the hungry group would rapidly face another biological terror: protein poisoning, historically known as rabbit starvation. Small wild game is incredibly, dangerously lean, almost entirely devoid of the essential fat your body craves. The human liver can only safely metabolize roughly 200 to 300 grams of pure protein per day. If a survivor consumes nothing but lean protein without adequate dietary fats or complex carbohydrates to balance the load, they will rapidly develop severe systemic protein toxicity. You are poisoning yourself with the very food you hunted. Rabbit starvation is incredibly well documented by early Arctic explorers. The vicious symptoms include severe dehydrating diarrhea, blinding headaches, profound muscular fatigue, dangerously low blood pressure, and eventually total organ failure and death. You can literally eat your fill of lean woodland meat every single day, walking around with a completely full stomach, and still slowly starve to death. The human machine strictly requires dense fats to function on a cellular level. Without preserved butter, heavy oils, or thick animal fats, your pristine wilderness diet rapidly becomes a highly toxic biological trap from which your body cannot escape. Foraging for wild edibles presents a very similar, massively negative energy return. Walking for grueling hours to meticulously pick a few tiny handfuls of wild berries or dig up tough, fibrous roots burns far more calories than the raw plants actually provide to your system. You simply cannot forage enough wild dandelions and tiny pine nuts to properly fuel 15 adult humans carrying heavy tactical packs through hostile terrain. Foraging is strictly a supplementary tactic, not a primary long-term survival strategy. It is merely what you do to stop the hunger pangs on the long walk to your actual sustainable food source. The absolute lack of dietary fat in a wilderness survival scenario also completely destroys internal hormone production. Testosterone levels rapidly plummet. Estrogen levels crash. This severely and negatively impacts critical mood regulation, high-pressure decision-making, and necessary aggressive drive. Your once highly capable group will quickly become lethargic, deeply depressed, and violently irritable with one another. The vital social fabric of your base camp will begin to fray and snap, simply because the crucial lipid profiles in their blood have dropped well below critical thresholds. Prolonged starvation inevitably destroys group morale long before it finally destroys the physical body. By day 31, you firmly enter the long haul. This is exactly where the rigid agricultural imperative takes over the timeline. Without large-scale agriculture, human civilization simply dies. Endless nomadic survival is a dangerous cinematic illusion. Agriculture is the absolute only way to achieve a massively positive energy return on investment. You plant a single tiny kernel of corn in the dirt, and it eventually yields a massive ear containing 800 dense kernels. Finding a highly defensible, remote farm with rich arable land is the only mathematically sound survival strategy for a large group trying to outlast a collapse. But the strict math of subsistence farming is unbelievably brutal and requires vast, uninterrupted amounts of time. To successfully feed one human being for an entire year requires roughly 1 million stored calories. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, to grow that much food using traditional, non-mechanized methods requires roughly 1 to 2 solid acres of land per person. That highly optimistic metric absolutely assumes good soil, proper weather, and a perfectly balanced mix of high-calorie staple crops and necessary legumes for protein. You cannot just throw seeds in the dirt and expect to survive the coming winter. For a desperate group of 25 people, you would rigorously need roughly 40 to 50 acres of land under active, daily cultivation to survive a single year. Subsistence farming requires staggering, agonizing physical labor. Without diesel fuel for modern tractors, the deep tilling, planting, aggressive weeding, and massive harvesting must all be done entirely by hand or with draft animals. A primitive farmer working by hand easily burns upward of 4,000 calories a single day. You are working on your hands and knees in the rough dirt from dawn until dusk, aggressively burning human fuel just to create future human fuel. Potatoes are absolutely one of the most calorically dense and easiest survival crops to grow. A single cultivated acre can theoretically yield 10,000 pounds of potatoes, translating to about 3.5 million life-saving calories. But potatoes take 90 to 120 long days to fully mature. What exactly does your hungry group eat during those 4 long months? If you have not intelligently stockpiled a massive, secure reserve of dense staple foods to safely bridge the biological gap until the first harvest, your exhausted farmers will quite literally starve to death right there in the fields. The secure farm is not just a quiet, safe haven to comfortably sleep in. It is an intense, mandatory labour camp. To survive the freezing coming winter, every able-bodied person must be out in the fields 12 hours a day, desperately trying to stockpile heavy root vegetables and grains. If your group treats a farm as a temporary resting place instead of a critical, life-saving infrastructure project, you are completely sealing your own thermodynamic fate. Foolishly walking away from secure arable land to return to a dangerous nomadic lifestyle guarantees your eventual death by extreme caloric deficit. You prepare obsessively so you never have to watch the people you fiercely love pay the ultimate price for your sheer ignorance. Build your deep stockpile. Master your unglamorous logistics. Do the hard biological math before the unforgiving math does you in. Because when the fragile system finally collapses and the world goes completely dark, the electrical grid is not what keeps the lights on. It is the only thing that keeps the monsters out.